Hey everybody, welcome to Sound Bombing. I created this show for people who want to experience a radical, life-changing journey through the sounds of my diverse guests. I hope that each sound you hear on this show will strengthen your faith, encourage your dreams, and challenge you to awaken the greatness within you.
Drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We're gonna drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We're gonna drop the bomb. Drop the bomb. We come to drop the bomb. Drop the bomb.
This is a journey into sound. A journey which along the way will bring to you new color, new dimension, new values, and a new experience.
And what that says is that we are here, and I am here live, coming through your radio, coming through your speaker, coming through your computer, coming through your TV, coming through your Alexa app. I hope that you can hear me clear because I am always excited, bombers, that you decided to join me. As Jay-Z said, you could have been anywhere in the world, but you are with me today. And I'm so grateful and I'm so honored because, again, you know, some people don't want to listen to me, but that's a whole nother conversation. But I'm glad that you decided to be with me. But I think people do want to listen to me because if they did not, they would not be sending me the great emails that they are, asking questions, asking me about bringing certain guests on, thanking me for the guests that I've brought on thus far, and also sending questions. So again, I thank you, I thank you, I thank you. And as always, we hope and pray that you are in a safe place. This pandemic, this international pandemic, has shut many of us down, made us all quarantine ourselves, and I'm hoping that you are being self-reflective. But beyond being self-reflective, I'm hoping that you are safe, that you are keeping your hands clean, that you are eating those healthy whole foods, that you are physically distancing yourself, not social distancing, because we are social animals, and the moment that we become physically distanced, that takes care of ourselves. But the moment that we become socially distanced, we become animals, and we are humans on this planet. And so again, we want you to check in on all of those elders that are out there that need your help. I'm loving my community. We've come together so much, so I'm grateful for that. And then last week, we talked to Glenn Ambrose, and he talked about overcoming obstacles. He talked about his addictions. He talked about how he came out of that and how it saved his life. And now he is on a mission to share with everybody a message of hope and grace and prosperity. And just like always, every person I bring on, they are a superhero. They are going to teach us some brain hacks so we can be great and walk in our greatness. And today is no different. And so let's get started. Sound bombers, there is no gain in saying that a movie does wield a tremendous influence in the society. Children and the grown-ups are equally exposed to the dangers of the vulgarity and degrading value of cheap popular cinema in the guise of entertainment. Cinema has perhaps the greatest potential to be the most effective mass media instrument. Besides proving cheap entertainment for masses, it can easily become a means of mass instruction and mass education. If you know anything about me, I love film. And cinema has certainly some clear advantages over other media. It combines primarily both audio and video, and is thus very appealing to the eyes and the ears. With the development of color and cinematography and stenography sound, it is certainly one up on other media. The moral values conveyed through the media of cinema have a lasting effect on the audience. The audience also has a moral, emotional involvement in the course of the events, and the roles of various characters, their language and style of speaking does leave an impression on the spectators. Films of any genre, from documentary to drama, can have a dramatic impact on real life. Chances are excellent that you've seen at least one film that has changed the landscape of how popular culture, even if you're not aware of it. These films that have changed our lives outside the theater in tangible ways are excellent examples of the important role film plays in the world at large. There is no question that watching films can help us escape our everyday lives. However, all the kinds of films impact our society and popular culture. And so, if you know anything about me, I love film, I love cinema, I love theater. So, I'm excited to be joined with Eric Christiansen. He's an acclaimed documentarian who has built his brand around socially responsible filmmaking that educates, inspires, and heals. He has the capability to identify an issue within a specific population and have it resonate with the general audience through compelling storytelling. A trauma survivor himself, having lost his home in the Santa Barbara Painted Cave fire disaster, he understands trauma, the resilience of the human spirit, and how important hope is to the healing journey. His previous films, Faces in the Fire, Homecoming, A Vietnam Vet's Journey, Searching for Home, and Coming Back from War, have been transformative in the recovery process for thousands of people whose lives have been compromised mentally, spiritually, and physically by trauma. Leveraged as educational tools by top mental health institutions, Christensen's films migrate from the entertainment arena into the environments that help additional audiences navigate the profound collateral damage trauma creates, not only on the individual, but the family and community as well. The New York Times called his last film strikingly photographed and sure to give comfort and support to countless veterans and their families by spotlighting these survivors and their journeys. Christensen has been able to help unify a variety of audiences around the power of hope and educate the general population about the complexities of trauma. Christensen, 7-time Southwestern Region Emmy Award recipient, has also produced for major networks including Discovery, TLC, PBS, MTV, and IMAX Film. And today he is joining me in the BalmShelter. So welcome, Eric, to the show. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great, Lamar, and thanks for reminding me to take that breath. I was actually doing it before, and then you're like, take another one. I'm like, hey, you know what? I think I will, and clear myself up a little bit, get ready for this. And thank you for such a great introduction.
You are, first of all, let me just say this. Eric, you are an amazing individual. People that know me know I'm like a bootleg filmmaker, Eric. I'm always walking around with a camera. I'm always walking around with a couple of phones to capture not only just images, but also stories. I love stories. I love imagery. I love documentaries. And my children, Eric, always saying to me, you always trying to trick us into watching a documentary. I'll tell them I'm going to show them a feature film. And then I get them all the time. I get them all the time because once they're in it, then they're in it forever, man. So I thank you for joining me, man. I got a lot of questions to ask you. I know my producer and engineer sent me some of the questions, but let's just talk about, the role of filmmaking in society, man. Talk to me about the role of filmmaking in society. In particular, let's just say in the age of what's going on right now.
Oh my gosh. You mentioned the power of film, and it's funny because, I got 3 kids and bringing the kids up, some of the parents would like totally show these young kids inappropriate films and they go, oh, it's just a movie, and I'm kind of like, wait, a movie is so much, it just, and with my filmmaking, the ultimate goal of my filmmaking is to use the music, use the imagery, use what the people are saying, the actual subjects to weave this story. I'm using animation in my new film because it goes into one step further into where your mind can really go, because then I'm not limited by the physical. And so, when you combine all those things together, film is so deep and powerful. It touches you in a place that you don't even know you're being affected. It goes past that conscious, front end of your brain, and it affects you subconsciously. And that's one of my goals with my filmmaking, is to affect people subconsciously, but affect them with the idea of overcoming, of healing, and of hope. And, and through aspirational filmmaking, and seeing somebody else overcome something, I really want people to be highly inspired. And that's one level. And then the other level is to produce empathy and tolerance. But, I hear you talking about in your intro, there's so much also detrimental effects that films can have. Like I said, children seeing totally inappropriate films, and so much darkness in filmmaking and stuff, and that is affecting us subconsciously. And that can really, if you're very sensitive to that can really affect you a lot. And in this time that we have, that we're living through, the COVID and this isolation, and what seems to every day is something new and unknown. We're very susceptible to that. We're very susceptible to input, because we're kind of, even if you like it or not, in this environment, we're kind of getting a little bit raw, and so these things can really affect us. So, you have to be very careful about what you put into this jar that we have of a body. And as you said, filmmaking so affects you on such a deep level, and so my filmmaking, I like to put good things into that, and then be effective in a subconscious way, moving towards hope. And it's a huge responsibility. But my filmmaking wasn't always like that. It changed, and that's my path.
So Eric, why this medium? There's so many other art forms that you could have chosen. I think about a hip hop artist. I'm from Chicago. His name is Kanye West. I'm sure you heard of this guy. And so Kanye West, what people don't know about him is he's a painter. And I remember he was on MTV. He was being interviewed by someone. And the journalist who did a great job, and I love when people do research, because again, I hate the basic questions. And the guy asked him, he said, so Kanye, I hear that you are a painter. He said, why did you choose hip hop over painting? And he says, painting wasn't loud enough for me. And I thought that was so poetic that he decided to go in a different direction. And now, of course, he's painting, but he's designing. Why did you choose this medium when there's so many other mediums that you could have chosen to share and tell stories?
That's such a great question, and it's great to hear about Kanye's story. And I think all sensitive artists and all people that are overall just an artist, they have many facets to them to try to express themselves. And then you find that one facet that really fits you like a puzzle, that becomes your instrument for telling your story. But for me, it seems like filmmaking kind of chose me. That I remember, it goes back to, I was about 7 years old, and I made my first movie with a script with a 8mm film camera. And I remember way back when, around 10 years old or so, I was making films all the time. And I knew I had a message. I just had this innate sense that I had a message, and I was just kind of trying to find it then. And it took almost 20-something more years before I really discovered what that real message was. But film kind of found me. And, I went to California Institute of the Arts in the 80s here. And, I have other forms of art that I love to participate in. I did a lot of screen printing with found art, and I love actually acting, and I love a lot of other things, but it's the filmmaking that kind of encapsulated me, and I was able to put all those different crafts into one kind of capsule. And that's what was so fascinating about my experience at CalArts, because in one day I'd be over at a gallery opening for, a performance artist doing some sort of performance piece. Then I'd be more in the fine arts, and I'd be able to see the paintings and serography. And then I'd be in a dance recital that evening, and then go see Ravi Shankar with his sitar, giving a performance in the hall. And so I was exposed to so many things that opened me up to the possibilities, but I was able to use my my film work as a way to encapsulate all that and bring people together and collaborate. And, I'm in the process right now of finishing one of my films, and that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm reaching out to the composer and everything, but that's a long answer for a really basic question, isn't it?
No, that was good. So here's a follow-up to that. Was there a particular event or time that you recognized that filmmaking was not just a hobby, but that it will be your life and your living?
It's interesting. I think I lost my home, as you said. I lost my home in the Painted Cave fire disaster in Santa Barbara in 1990, and it took me. And before that, I was in the industry. I was doing a lot of work as an editor, mainly doing commercial work, doing music videos, doing rap music videos. And it was a lot of flash, a lot of excitement. And then after the fire, though, it really knocked me on my behind. And it was, that's a understatement, but it was something way bigger than me, took everything away from me. And I had to really readjust and look at my life. And 7 months later, much like your guest that you had last week, I became clean and sober. And then through that clarity I got with that, I realized that my work meant more than just the glitz, meant more than I'd found my message that I talked about when I was 7 years old. That message, I had found that. I'm like, I have a craft that I can use to express myself, but not only express myself, but express other people's feelings in a positive way. And that's when I did my first personal film called Faces in the Fire, about a group of survivors of that fire disaster and our recovery a year after. And it was based mainly on, rebuilding hope. And Faces in the Fire premiered like a year after the fire disaster in Santa Barbara. And I discovered a lot of people by seeing themselves on the screen that were in the film, and other people that weren't involved but connected to the film, that it was a very powerful medium. And the story at hope, and not just about the fire, but of the healing afterwards, really resonated with the audience. And a lot of people, it really instigated a lot of healing. And so that was kind of my eye-opener when I realized I had just not a kind of a career or whatever. It became my calling. And then there was a series of films after that just supported that, and that's the calling I've been on ever since then. But that film not only won my first Emmy Award, but it was picked up by the National Institute of Mental Health as a teaching tool to use for practitioners. When they come into a disaster site, they pick up therapists and practitioners in the area, and they have to train them to debrief the people, that the survivors of the disaster. And they started using that film as a film to teach these therapists what to expect when they deal with a disaster survivor. And so that was super powerful for me. So it became my calling.
So what's interesting, what I'm hearing you say, is that in the process of making that film, I'm sure your goal was not to say that this film is going to be a learning tool to do X, Y, and Z, but somebody else saw that film and said, hey, we could then use this to then work with trauma survivors, other folks who are dealing with atrocities in their life, and make their life, work on some of the struggles that they're actually dealing with as an individual. So because you talked about that word hope, how did that make you feel? Because you made a film to highlight what happened in this fire with the people that were affected by it and you were affected by it, and then now it's being used in a different light. Do you when you're coming into a project, when you approach a project, do you approach it that way, or you allow the film or the project to go in whichever direction it wants to go into?
There's two questions there. The first piece is when I see people change because of the films, when I see things like almost a social movement kind of come up around it, and or I just hear one or two stories about people that have been able to switch their life around or been positively affected. I call that kind of my soul food. That becomes I call it God's economy. That's kind of my big paycheck in a way from working on these films. Then the other question about how do I approach a film when it first comes to me, and the decision and how I make the decision to make the film, wow, that becomes kind of a spiritual matter with me, because I believe certain things are brought to me to a certain extent. Then the other thing that's very, very important to me is that I have some sort of connection with what I would basically call the population that I'm entering into to make the film about, which reminds me of when after I did Faces in the Fire, and it was quite a few years afterwards, because I did a lot of other PBS work, a lot of other films, Discovery, after Faces in the Fire, but I was looking for a similar experience for myself again and my own personal project. I was introduced to a Vietnam veteran who became a very good friend. He was a Purple Heart Silver Star recipient. We went to a men's group together, and I was praying about finding another film, and he mentioned his mom had passed away, so he was thinking of going on this motorcycle run from California to the wall in Washington, D.C. with 300 other vets. And he said it was more of a pilgrimage than a motorcycle run. And then I'm like, oh, that was laid in my lap. There's my film, about this healing arc that takes place going across the country. And so the answer is, they're kind of laid in my lap, but I have to have a special connection to it, and it has to have an element of hope and healing, obviously, to it. That's really powerful. But that's how my second film came about, Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey.
So I like that we're talking about creativity and how you approach it. I'm always interested in how creators or content creators approach a project, be it a painting, a dance, or a song. But when inspiration, Eric, is waning, when you feel creatively stuck, what do you do?
Oh my gosh. It used to be I would go out with a camera and go shoot an interview, connect with something connected to what I was working on. But as the mechanizations, I guess, or the mechanics of my projects get bigger and bigger, it's not that easy anymore. To be super honest with you, Lamar, I'm just coming out of a little bit of a funk with my current project, Unmasking Hope, because I delve so deep into the business side of it. I have two great producers I'm working with. And before it was like, okay, Homecoming: A Vietnam Vet's Journey. I grabbed a good friend of mine, and it was, him and I going across the United States in a 4-wheel with 300 motorcycles, and we made this film, and it was so simple and easy in a way. But now it's kind of like, well, I got two producers, and then they want a pitch deck. Then there's my publicist. And so I kind of crawled into Unmasking Hope on this business side and got kind of hopeless. I wasn't in process, so when I get stuck now, I need to get in process somewhere. I need to talk to another artist. I need to move forward just on a small idea about the film. I can't get stuck in the business. And I tell you, I got stuck in the business on this. And now it's just in the last 3 days. I really started like get back at the process, talking about, okay, we're going to shoot this. How are we going to shoot this? Because we have a lot of creative opportunities that come as challenges right now with the COVID and social distancing, how we shoot something, how we finish something. I prefer to call it a creative challenge. So now I'm kind of juiced up. You got me at a good time. If you would have talked to me like last week, I would have been, wow, Lamar, I'm a little bit bummed about everything.
Well, so how is filmmaking being made during this pandemic where you have to be physically distant from one another? I mean, I hadn't even thought about that, because I'm sure, I mean, California is on a major lockdown. My partner is out there working, and we do a lot of our Zoom calls. How are you all being, or how are you in particular being creative when you have these projects on the table? Are you stopping the shooting process, or are you still moving forward?
You know, I mentioned my CalArts background in the 80s. And one of my teachers told me that, you know, you can look at budget constraints, you can look at equipment constraints, you can look at basic production problems as negatives, or you can look at them as an opportunity. And so the same thing that, I don't have enough money to shoot this way, et cetera, or I don't have enough money to shoot this way, but what is the way around it that's going to force me to have a creative solution that nobody else is going to see? I mean, that nobody else is going to be doing. This is my creative opportunity. So with the COVID right now, you know, that's how I have to kind of handle this. I have a great partner, I guess you would say, in Black Magic Design, and they do hardware and software. And I have a excellent contact there that's a full-on techie. He works on The Mandalorian, and he works on all these major films implementing a lot of hardware and software. But I called him to talk to him about remote production. I'm like, how are we going to do this remote production thing? And I'm currently in production on this film, Unmasking Hope, and some of my trauma survivors are out there in isolation. And so we had this big discussion, and we're like, wow, you know, Zoom calls, you know, that it could actually be incorporated as part of the whole content of the film, to have these Zoom calls with the survivors at their home, discuss their issues, what's coming up. There's a lot going on with these people, because, you know, when I say when isolation is a prescription, there's a lot of other problems that the prescription causes. But the Zoom call itself now, we've come up with a way to actually screen grab, record, and ISO all the different cameras and everything. So I'm using these Zoom calls as part of the film, checking in with them in their situation in their home during isolation. And that's one of the creative ways. The other thing is, I have a couple calls coming up again with some of the techs, and we're putting together a remote case with a camera and everything you need. And we send this case out to people that we're going to interview. They set up, and then I remotely direct things through Zoom, and we're refining that whole system right now. So we're overcoming some of this, but also I want to incorporate some of this and the whole vibe, for lack of a better word, of what's going on will be kind of shown itself in these Zoom interviews that we have, because everybody's taken to Zoom now. Mm-hmm. And so that's I'm trying to creatively overcome these things, but also very grounded in technology and trying to do the best I can to keep the quality of my work up.
And that's what I'm so interested in, because listening to you talk about how you're being creative, out of this necessity comes a level of creativity. I'm just marveling and smiling from ear to ear, because you would not have known how to do these things if this thing had never happened. And I wish that more people in life could see those things not as obstacles, as roadblocks, but lessons that you can learn from this. And I think that, you know, you are a great example of that, because what I've discovered from the films that you've made and from what we've read about you, there's several things that unify your films, and it has a lot to do with truth, healing, and a level of hope. And I read somewhere that you were quoted saying that I believe we are in an empathy crisis in the United States. And I think that you were talking about issues around mental health, an area that I spent a lot of work in. Can you explain what you meant by that statement?
Oh my gosh, the empathy crisis.
Because in your film, you're showing a different side of that.
Yeah, and you know, it comes down to, it's like when people ask me in these interviews, it's like if you could like sum up what we need, you know, in one word or make it simplify it, I would say empathy. Because empathy is feeling what another person feels, walking in their shoes, you know, and it's a tough thing, and it's a place that's very risky for the individual that's trying to connect with somebody else, because then you're opening yourself up, and you're opening yourself up to see another point of view. I think what I mean with the empathy crisis, I know what I mean with the empathy crisis is through social media, through this divisive political discourse. I mean, saying discourse is giving it way too much credit. We've broken everything down into sound bites and very simple ways to think, because we want to like think of a complex situation in a sentence. You know, it goes back to something as simple as, you know, looking at the homeless person and going, why don't they get a job? You know, and instead of taking the time to try to understand and look at it a little bit different, you know, that homeless guy right there, he was somebody's son. He could possibly be somebody's father. That starts to break down your guard. It starts to create a whole different gray area. And it starts to create a little bit of understanding to their position that for you as a viewer. And then it pulls you back from these snap judgments that we hear on every single subject. It comes down to a soundbite and 4 words, you know? And so with my recent films about veterans and PTSD, which is such kind of a lightning rod, and those crazy vets, or however you want to see it, I try to explain and show the human side of the trauma. And so it breaks down that quickly. Why don't they just get over it? You know, that's one of the most hurtful things you can say to somebody. And that's the easy, non-empathetic way of looking at this. For Becky, one of our 9/11 survivors in my film I'm working on now, man, it was over 18 years ago. A lot of people do think, why don't they just get over it? But that's probably the most hurtful thing that you can say. So I'm trying to delve in there and take the time so the viewer can get to know them. It brings about awareness, and then it brings about a crack in your heart where you can get a little empathy. Then in real life, when you're walking around and you see a trauma survivor that's still having a difficult time around some issues, hopefully it brings about an amount of tolerance.
Yes.
So that's kind of how that works for me.
And well, it's interesting. We're doing the same type of work. Of course, I'm not at the level of you with the filmmaking, but as a speaker, I spend a lot of time, Eric, in school districts, programs, after school programs, agencies all over the country, talking about issues around equity. And when I say equity, I'm not talking about financial equity. I'm talking about everything that you just talked about, the human side of an individual. And one thing I hate when I walk into these spaces is when I hear people say, why don't they just get over it? Why don't they move on? Why don't they just get a job? Why don't they stop using these excuses? Why don't they just do all these other things? And we talk about privilege. We talk about implicit bias. We talk about all those things. And just like you, in your work as a filmmaker, I'm also creating those conversations. We're not capturing them in a way because, again, the conversations we have are very intimate, and we have to sort of hold them to our chest. But I still walk out of there sometimes, Eric, just feeling a little heavy. But then every so often I feel a level of hope. Even though I feel heavy in one breath, and then another breath I feel a level of hope. As you're doing this work around trauma survivors, and I see that that's sort of the common theme, do you feel a level of hope, or do you feel some heaviness when you shut the cameras down and you say that's a wrap?
Oh my gosh. Again, Lamar, that's another great question. And that's something that I've had to learn how to let the heaviness go and stay in the hope in a grateful place. And so I'll try to put it in a little microcosm of what I've learned in, well, the last 30 years of working with trauma survivors in various capacities, basically, as subjects in my film, and they get to be good friends, practically family sometimes. But how do I deal with that heaviness is I have the gift of empathy. I am an empath. I can connect with people on an emotional level and understand what they're feeling. It's not like I can read minds. It's very different than that. But what I do in my interviews is I create a space in connecting with these individuals where it's very safe for them, because I tell all my crew members, and they're carefully selected, anybody that gets in the sphere of the survivors, I tell all my crew members that the people come first. Our transparency and our connection to them comes first, then the film. And the funny thing is, the film benefits because of that. But I get in this space with the individual that where I can become completely transparent with them, and I become a place they can download to me. So basically what they're doing is giving me this very, very sacred story, because it is their life story. It's the most significant. Quite often the trauma is the most significant thing that's ever happened in their life to them. And so I take this story as a gift, and then I get it on film also, on tape or on digital. And what I then do, and I've learned to do, is after that session, I always tell everybody that I work with I love them, et cetera, et cetera. But after that session, I take that story and that experience that I've had in my mind and that super emotional experience, and I figuratively, in my mind, I put that into a very, very special little wooden box, that's all carved and everything. And it's a sacred, special little box, and I file it away, and then I go back to my own emotional being. And I thank them, and I'm grateful for them handing that special, sacred part of their life over to me. I take that box out again and again in the process of making the film when I'm editing and I'm working on the film and things like that. But I take it as a gift. I'm grateful for it, no matter how heavy the material is, which can get quite heavy with some of these individuals. And then I'm able to assemble it in a way that honors them and reflect their life on screen. And inevitably, when the individual sees it, when it's finished, it really affects them and changes them in a positive way, because then their whole life has been validated. This whole experience I had that I thought I was going through alone, et cetera, now is on the screen and helping other people. So it comes out that way. But for me, I honor it, I experience it, but I'm able to put it away. When I wasn't able to do that, I was falling apart.
I can only imagine, because that's how I feel when I'm leaving.
From all the heaviness.
Yes, you're right.
But if you take that heaviness, and then again, I think it's a theme of our talk today, is turning things around and making it an opportunity and a positive. I take that heaviness that I feel that I've been given, and I honor it in a way that I've received something back. I've received a gift through their story. And that's how I kind of deal with it. And, and time again, that process, it's a very spiritual process for me too, because I'm guided while I'm making the film. I'm guided while I'm editing. And so when it finally gets back out there and they see their life validated, that's priceless to me.
Eric, I wish you could actually see me, man. I'm just shaking my head in agreement, because I believe in the power of stories. Andrew Stanton, you probably know him from Pixar,
Okay, I just don't want to interrupt you, but yeah, Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter were good friends of mine at CalArts.
So I love his story, The Clues
yeah,
to a Great Story. And as I'm listening
yeah.
to you talk about that, I've created a storytelling series called Shortcuts along with my partner Darius Wilmore. And
Oh,
Eric is specifically geared towards people of color because I'm a TED speaker. I've done talks and all this. But when I look at them, most of the stories are not people of color. So we decided to dedicate our stories to people of color. And ironically enough, and I don't believe in a coincidence, this month is Mental Health Awareness Month.
oh yeah.
And I'm listening to you talk about how you're being very creative with your stories, and we're having to do the same thing to create our show, be using Zoom. And it's a live storytelling series with DJ and music. And this month is focusing on mental health. And we started this maybe in February, but again, COVID kicked in and we had to stop our rehearsals. So we do these Zoom calls. But I use Andrew Stanton's TED Talk as the very first video that I show them about the power of the stories. And I'm like you, listening to you describe these stories that people give you, I say the same thing. I think that they're gifts. The fact that, storytelling is the oldest, I think, thing that exists in the oldest profession. There's another old profession, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah.
But again, it's something that all races and cultures of people have carried along. And I was just reading in Mindful Magazine about how they're talking about the research around stories reading aloud, the old way of reading aloud. And so I really understand that. But my question right now is not just about the story, but it's about the interview. What makes a great interview? Because you're sitting down with people that are giving you all of them. And they have this camera, they have these lights, they have these strangers that they don't know. But it's something about you that pulls it out. And I want to know that. This question is for me, man. What makes a great interview?
Oh, wow. What makes a great interview? And the first thing I go to is I say this word transparency, and it's like, okay, what do you mean by that? Is that there are no fronts that are put up? There's no predisposed kind of fronts. There's nothing in that space in between you and the individual that's going to direct or even block the exchange and flow. And I don't even want to say ideas or anything. I mean, I'm getting very kind of metaphysical on this, but we try to create a very special space for these individuals when we come into this. And a great interview is when I ask the first question, because I've meditated on this. I've tried to connect with them in various ways and metaphysically, that I ask the first question, and then all those little things, I drive my producers crazy because I hardly ever jot down my questions anymore. But they go through the whole phase just off of one question. And then you are, and I call it this time and time again, you begin surfing with that individual. And the surfing is that it's a true connection, soul to soul, and you're looking into them and they're able to look into you, and you have this deep exchange. And I don't know where that gift has come for me. And it happens time and time again. I sit there and worry between each film or each interview even, how is this ever going to happen again? I sit down, then all of a sudden it just starts happening, and inevitably the subject gets up and goes, man, I've never told that. You're the second person I told this to, or I never told this to anybody. But what allows that is the purity of the space and your intention, I guess it comes down to. The transparency is a great word, but I can't even explain it. So I'm giving you a very nebulous answer to your question.
No, I'm following you. I get it because, I love questions. And the reason why I created Sound Bombing is because I love questions and I love people's stories. And I think people are fascinating beyond what they even imagine. I think that many folks are so caught up in the degrees that they have and things like that, but the average person's story blows me away. And when we created the storytelling series Shortcuts, man, I was blown away, Eric. I mean, we've done one called Coming to America about people of color who've come to this country. I'm Coming Out, about the LGBTQ plus community, women. We've done one on teachers. We're doing one on mental health. And it is a gift. When they give it to us, all we do is coach them. We coach them into the story because, there's stories on top of stories on top of stories on top of stories. And I want to go back to you because you talked about that Andrew Stanton. I don't want to gloss over that. I was just trying to get my question out, my thought out, because I love the way he shares the strategies and I love the creativity that goes into it. So I get it. And that's why I do what I do. I love it. I marvel when I look at people like Oprah and she's able to pull this stuff out of people. And back in the day when I was like in high school and I used to listen to Phil Donahue, I would listen to those interviews and go back way when my grandmother would have me watching Dinah Shore and, all those individuals that ask great questions. Man, I was paying it just like you walked around shooting films. Man, I was listening to questions. I was intrigued by people's stories.
Wow.
And people questions, and now I have an opportunity to do that. So speaking of questions, because I know I have some filmmakers out there, and if I don't ask this question, Eric, they will probably not listen to me anymore. What advice would you give to someone who wanted to have a life in creating film?
Oh my gosh. Just do it. Try to find your voice and here's the thing. Try to create out of what you know. And then it's genuine, because it's the people that come in and this kind of dovetails back into the interview question. I don't like being called a filmmaker. I'd rather be called a messenger, a healer, whatever it is. But a filmmaker to me is kind of negative in a way, because the filmmaker comes in with an idea of how something's going to be, and they think, wow, these veterans, there's such a dramatic story there. I want to tell this story, but this is a story I want to tell. So then when they sit down in the interview, they keep redirecting it back into what they think the experience should be. And then that genuine connection, that transparency is all gone. And they have this kind of false idea that they've created about the subject matter. And it shows. So going back to your question, is when you truly understand recovery, for me it's recovery, it's grief recovery. I truly understand that space, and it's very genuine, my connection and understanding of it. I just didn't choose things because it's dramatic and I want to do it and it sounds like it'd be really cool. So going back to those filmmakers that are listening, to any storyteller, to anybody, go from what's very genuine with your experience, because everybody has a unique experience, and then try to reflect that in your work somehow and your connections with other people. But here's the crazy thing, is my connection with recovery is through recovery from drugs and alcohol, which continues, and I have to practice that daily to maintain my sobriety. It comes from the fire. I went through what I would call trauma, not like anything severe, but that actually translates into different populations. It translates to the soldiers. It translates, I can sit down and talk to a 9/11 survivor and understand what they're talking about because of my personal experience, and it's pretty genuine to me. So what I'm trying to say is come from a very genuine place of your own experience, and you'll find out how it actually, the roots go out to other populations, other type of people that you can connect with. But when you try to just do something for doing something's sake, because it seems like a shock value or whatever, it never really works. I go back to CalArts, with Andrew Stanton and Pete Docter, we're all there at the same time. But I had my teacher, and if Johanna's listening to this, Johanna Demetrakis, she told me, do not act like do not follow the flavor of the week. Do not chase that. If you keep doing what you do and make it yours, one day you'll be the flavor of the week. And I really believe that.
Wow. That's a great way to end the show, but I'm not because I got another question. But I'm going to edit that out because I do want to end with that. You are dealing with some very touchy subjects and some people who are dealing with a lot of challenges. And I know you're not a mental health worker, you're not a therapist, but I think that you are all of those things because you don't consider yourself as a filmmaker. But with that being said, Eric, how do you as a filmmaker or messenger interview someone about their trauma without triggering them?
How do I interview somebody without triggering them? You know, it goes back to, there's two levels to that. One is a very conscious level. If we haven't connected in the way I need to connect, which is, you know, feeling their emotions, writing it out with them, surfing with them, then I have to be very conscious in my brain what we're talking about and where I'm leading them. Quite often, if we go into a heavy place, I will vary the questioning and bring them out to a more lighter place afterwards, so we can have a refreshing like thought and flow. But the second level of that is if I'm involved in a really intense interview, we have that connection rolling, the trust is flowing both ways, and so that triggering becomes less of an issue. And that trust then that they give me, again, it's a sacred responsibility that it's been transferred. I can feel that, and I can feel where we're able to go and where we're able to push. And I don't push. If you're genuine and you sit down and start to talk to somebody, like I said before, and you have that clear channel with them, they will open up and you'll hear some intense things without even having to ask once they give you the access. And so it's not about manipulation. It's not about anything other than a true connection with a human being. And you asking questions, you know what that's like. You know, when you really connect, and it happens 90% of the time with my interview subjects, it's a two-way trust, you know, and you develop that trust. And so it is an issue, and I have to be very careful about it. You know, it's interesting because there's a whole nother flip side to that we can, and that ends up being a big discussion is, you know, how in the film, how do we portray these events without triggers? That's a whole nother like set of, I won't even get into that because that's not the question, but it becomes a question of, it becomes a subject of trust and flowing with them and really understanding where the other person goes, and they will allow you to go there if you build the trust, and they'll go there on their own.
Well, Eric Christiansen, I can talk to you forever, man, from amateur filmmaker to professional Emmy award-winning filmmaker. I just thank you for spending some time with me in the BalmShelter today. Your message, your films, your words are very impactful. I will go back and check out more. I really appreciate everything that you've actually said. This is one of my favorite parts of the show. It's called the Super Balm Questions, and this is where I get a chance to ask the guests a variety of questions, and I want you to give me the quickest response that pops up on your head. So this is not slow motion. This is Super Balm quick questions. So are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, so here we go. Eric, what is your favorite word?
Empathy.
What's your favorite quote or Bible verse?
You know what? My favorite Bible verse, I just saw it the other day, that man makes his plans, but the Lord controls his footsteps, basically paraphrasing, orders his footsteps. So a man makes his plans, but the Lord orders his footsteps. It's a proverb.
Like that. What's your superpower?
I think it's empathy.
What's your spirit animal?
Oh my gosh. I like frogs.
What moves you to tears of joy?
Oh, my kids.
What moves you to tears of sorrow?
Seeing somebody fail in recovery.
What do you wish you had more time to do?
Surf.
If you could meet a dead person, who would you most like to want to meet and get advice from?
Oh, man. Theodore Roosevelt.
What is the film you've given most as a gift and why?
Oh, man. A movie called Shelter. And it's a small surf movie by these guys called the Malloy brothers. And I love surfing, and it has the soul of surfing in it. But Shelter is about people that surf and use surfing as a shelter from the traumas they've had in life.
Okay. All right. What is one of the best or most worthwhile investments you've ever made?
I'm in a surf mode. I'm thinking my custom 9-foot longboard that I have. I love that.
Okay. All right. If you were in the Mr. America talent competition, what would your talent be?
Oh, man. Skateboarding?
Well, Eric Christiansen, man, I appreciate you spending time with me in the BalmShelter, man. I learned quite a bit. You are an inspiration because I do love film. All of my children are artists, or we love art, or we love film. Since the COVID-19 virus pandemic has taken place, every day, every week, Eric, my children and I watch a film. I choose a film, and then we do what I call a fishbowl. I have questions in a bowl, and then we go around. We pull questions from that to have a conversation.
How fun!
The film. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and they look forward to it. Man, why did they want to watch Car Wash last week? You remember Car Wash, man?
Oh,
Richard
yeah,
Pryor,
I remember the song
Bill
too.
Duke, everybody was in that.
Oh,
film,
yeah.
man. And so
that car wash is in downtown LA, and I love.
I know.
When I go to Staples Center, I walk by it, and every time I hear the beginning of the song.
Man, that's so funny. So again, they wanted to see that when I put it on social media, everybody was laughing. They were, of course, talking about the film. So Eric, I thank you for joining me today, man. You've been a pleasure to speak with.
Oh, Lamar, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, and I love what you're doing with your podcast.
Well, thank you, and I also want to thank my engineer, Alec Blanc, my producer, Kimberly Peterson, Supremacy, for our theme music, and all of you for listening. Make sure you subscribe, leave a comment, and stop being stingy and share me with your friends. We're on every podcast platform. If you want to know more about me, you can visit drdrlds.com, drlds.com. And as always, believe that something wonderful is about to happen, and that some people miss the message because they're too busy looking for the mess. Thanks for tuning in, and do something for someone other than yourself today. You've been listening to Sound Bombing. Peace.